Hello, and welcome to another edition of Brussels Sprouts. I'm Andrea Kendall-Taylor.
And I'm Jim Townsend.
And we're so glad you can join us. On April 9th, Friedrich Merz, the leader of Germany's center-right Christian Democratic Union, secured a coalition agreement with the Social Democrats following his party's victory in the federal elections. In early May, the Bundestag is expected to convene and elect him as the next chancellor. One of the most significant initiatives of this new government is likely to be a historic overhaul of Germany's defense posture. In the weeks following the elections, Merz spearheaded the passage of a landmark constitutional reform exempting defense spending from Germany's long-standing debt brake, which will allow the government to invest an additional 600 billion euros in defense over the next decade. As Europe seeks to strengthen its security in the context of a fracturing transatlantic alliance and the looming Russia threat, Merz is strategically positioning Germany to emerge as a pivotal military and political force. To discuss all of this and more, we're very pleased to welcome Claudia and Christian Mölling to discuss Germany's new government and defense strategy. Claudia and Christian, welcome back to Brussels Sprouts. Although I don't think we've had the two of you on one episode before, or maybe we have?
I think we had at some point.
Okay.
But thanks for the invitation.
Back. Yes.
Thanks for the invitation. It's always fantastic to be here.
Quick bios. Claudia is the Senior Vice President of Transatlantic Security at the German Marshall Fund, and Christian is Senior Advisor at the European Policy Center. So I always like to start with a little table setting. So maybe, Claude, we can start with you and just hear in your words kind of where we are in the arc of German politics. How would you describe this moment, where Germany is and where you think it's heading?
So in the moment, we are still in a little waiting moment. We had the coalition compact presented at 9th of April, as you said. The election were on 23rd of February. And we still don't have the new government. And this is due to a particularly German process. Namely, we have the coalition agreement where both the Conservative and the Social Democrats agreed on their government program. But now the parties have to accept this program. So the Conservative do a kind of smaller party congress, and the Social Democrats do a digital vote by the party base. So they have to accept it. The results are expected to be in on 30th of April. And only then, when the parliament meets again, we will have the new government. So it's quite a lengthy process. And it explains why we had elections in February, but the new chancellor is likely only to be sworn in May. So if you would be critical, you can say Germany is taking a little bit of holiday from international politics because we still have the former government in place, still deciding. So we are not without government in Germany. But everybody's actually expecting that the new government has to take the big decisions, and everybody is looking how the new potential government is positioning itself. So we are a little bit in a waiting room until 6th of May, when Friedrich Merz is expected to be sworn in as the chancellor.
But there have been some decisions, right? Like this decision that was made in this interim period about the removal of the debt brake. So Christian, how does that factor in?
So it factors in tremendously positively. It was I would say the best decision that you could take on the defense spending, because you may remember we had a special fund before. So that was something that was taken out of the normal budget, but that came to an end. And the discussion was at the beginning, okay, do we just do another special fund? But then with the risk that you can't continue the buildup of the armed forces because you don't have a continuous budget. Now we have a situation where you not only have the liberty to spend as much as you need, but it also, it comes with an extra also on the infrastructure side, because we also got, and that's not a small thing, we also got a special fund for the infrastructure. So it's timely limited, but a large amount of money. It's 500 billion euros that could be spent. And what you see is that these two decisions taken by the old government, if you want to, and the old parliament, are both driven from a security policy and defense point of view in this. So this is very interesting. So before we got back into this kind of, tunnel of domestic politics, which is, I guess, normal in democracy, the driving force for giving all this room of maneuver was basically the international situation and the question, how can we react and empower ourselves for the next 4 years to not only take the right decisions, but also to implement them.
Maybe just to underline that, to have those two decisions, accept defense spending above 1% on the debt brake and the 500 special budget, we needed to change the constitution. This is an enormous step in Germany, and Germany doesn't do it lightly and normally doesn't do it quickly. So what happened was a constitutional change in 2-3 weeks' time. So this is really an expression that the urgency was perceived, and there was a clear willingness to give the new government the instruments to succeed. Whether they will do it, we have to see, but at least there's a real sense of urgency and a willingness to take bold decisions in an area where Germany is normally extremely conservative. So changing constitution is really an enormous step.
I wanted to ask about that, though, just as a quick follow-up, which is you're talking about the kind of willingness to allow the government to facilitate the government to do this recognition that there is urgency. Is that widely shared, or is that coming from the top? Is it unique to this chancellor and his view of the moment and understanding of where we are, or do you think that this is shared and widely understood amongst the German public? I mean, was there, and maybe I'm wrong, was there a little bit of pushback or kind of discontent that he did this in the intervening period? How extraordinary was that?
Maybe it's kind of two answers. So if you take a look into the polls which have taken place exactly on this question that you just asked, the majority said it's the right move, but also a majority said, we felt a little bit, wouldn't say betrayed, but he was hiding from his real intention by not making clear that he would make that appeal to change the constitution before. So indeed, Merz was doing a tactical move during the election time because he knew that from his own constituency he wouldn't get much of an applause to do this. At the same time, I think that they were pretty clear of something needs to happen. So he was taking a risk here. And of course, then you get the pushback because others in his party already said, okay, we shouldn't, get rid of the debt brake. Merz himself was saying we first need to find the money elsewhere in the budget, and then we go for it. So he was taking a very classical stance on all these things. And I think that's important. So it's not only the constitutional change, it's also a change in the philosophy of the Conservative Party of what's the right thing to do. Because what they are doing here is basically they're making a social democratic move. So they are going for more investment without immediately cutting the money out of the budget elsewhere. And it's a kind of, I wouldn't say gamble, but he's really taking a risk because this has to pay off at the end of the day, not for the social democratic side, but also for his own constituency.
Anyway, it's great to see you all, and I think our Brussels Sprouts listeners should know that this is a power couple. This is not your normal couple in Berlin or Germany writ large. This is very unusual that the absolute top German analysts and commentators on German defense, European defense are with us today. So it's pretty cool. This is really great. So it's really good to see you guys. And now I've forgotten my question, but no, you all just highlighted how remarkable it was, whether it's changing the Constitution or it is what Merz did in terms of the political maneuvering. I mean, truly, all of us who have watched Germany and worked with Germany for so many years on defense, I think we really, really appreciate how difficult that is. And particularly for someone like Merz, who then went public about a couple of weeks ago, talking about the change in the U.S.-European relationship, et cetera. So my question for you is, what triggered it? Was there something specific that really pushed Merz and others over the top where where they said not only do we need to do this, but we're going to do things we don't normally do, whether it's the debt break or whatever. But it was something really pitched it over, because it's not like this is new as an issue. I mean, Schultz, he had his approach with the big fund, and so but something really pitched Merz over the top, and his collaborators there in the government. What was it? I mean, I think I have an idea, but I want to see from you all. What was it that really triggered them to say, let's do this?
Are you fishing for the Trump question there, Jim?
I'm not. Oh, I'm not fishing.
Leading the witnesses. No, but yeah, over to you both.
If you look at Merz and his team, and also at the Social Democrats, they were clearly conscious of the fundamental change with regard to Russia, the war in Ukraine, and with regard to Trump. If you look, for example, at the speeches Merz gave, so the future Chancellor gave before, he made very clear statements. He said something like Germany has to move from a sleeping middle power to a leading middle power. And he claimed a clear leadership not only in Europe, but only on defense, also on defense question. So he had very clear points he wanted to do. Tough on Russia, tough on defense, strengthening Europe, and being a bit tougher on China. So he had this all. I tend to think that the meeting in the Oval Office between Trump, Vance, and Zelensky was a moment that shocked Europe fundamentally and shocked also Germany fundamentally.
That's what I thought. That was what I was leading to, Andrea. Was that I thought that was it.
But I also have to add that the Vance speech at the Munich Security Conference, where he literally declared, "You Europeans are an ideological adversary," was also very strongly perceived in Germany. Maybe because it was in Germany, but also I think because there was a domestic politics element in the Vance speech, where he criticized the way the conservatives seek to distance themselves from the right-wing extremists in Germany, the so-called Alternative for Germany. So in the German perspective, or at least in the political sphere, there was increasingly the impression that there's not only an issue in security, not only with the US, not only an issue with Russia, but that the very basis of the transatlantic relationship doesn't work anymore. So that the US consciously decides to take an antagonistic position to Europe with regard to security policy, so siding with Russia, deciding to talk with Russia above the hands of the European and Ukraine, giving in Russian claims, requests before negotiations start. We remember the talks in Saudi Arabia about abandoning Ukrainian NATO membership and all those things. So there was the impression that in the area of security policy, the US is not longer with NATO, is not longer with the allies, but is signing up with Russia, is giving up on Ukraine, is not longer interested in NATO. In the area of trade and economy, there were clearly already the first ideas of the taxes. And if you look at the kind of value base or normative base of the relationship, you can listen to the Vance speech where Europeans are adversaries. So there was the impression that in all areas of the transatlantic relationship, we have a major change. And I think for Germany, this is particularly disturbing because German foreign policy is traditionally built on two pillars. It's Europe, France, European Union, and it's transatlantic, NATO, and the US. And particularly the US as the country that trusted Germany after the Second World War to become a democratic country, and it was the US that, from a German perspective, readmitted Germany in the family of respected states. So to see the US walking away from all that, I think it's more traumatizing it's differently traumatizing for Germany than for France or the UK or Italy. So it was perceived as a fundamental change. And to a certain extent, Germany feels, on the one hand, is Russia that wants to dominate Europe, wants to totally conquer Ukraine. And on the other hand, you have the US who is questioning the way of doing things, doesn't behave like an ally anymore, behaves like a great power. It's questioning the democratic basis. and is siding up with Russia. So I think it is really a traumatism. Maybe just one more sentence is, if you read the coalition compact, you don't feel that. They praise the transatlantic relationship as an important pillar, and you feel like hope as a strategy, or are we talking about the past? And to a certain extent, it's understandable, because from a German point of view, the idea is it's not Germany who's going to hand in the divorce paper. We want to stick to a good relationship. We want to keep the relationship. We want to do what it takes to keep it going to a certain extent. So we will not be the one who stop it. And you will hear very carefully crafted language in the German debates on not kicking the US out. And even if you talk about doing more for defense, it's not to replace the US. It's just we understand the US is changing its priorities, so we step up. So it's very, very carefully crafted, because there's a deep conviction, also from the leading people. Friedrich Merz, Lars Klingbeil are both convinced transatlanticists. They both spend lots of time in the US, they have personal ties, and they feel an almost physical pain in seeing this relationship falling apart. So it's a very interesting moment in Germany.
If I could ask a quick follow up, and I know Christian might want to add some things too, but you were saying that the view from the top ranks of the German government and probably Germans in the street, that they see that the U.S. has changed. The U.S. is it's the transatlantic relationship has changed, et cetera. Do people in Germany and yourselves too? Do you see that as a change of the United States, i.e., the US people as well, or is a Trump and his people? And really, what you're seeing is not so much the will and the drive of the American people to go in this direction. That really what you're seeing is Donald Trump and his people steering the country in a direction that they might not have known they were voting for, or even want to go in that direction. I know that's kind of leading the witness a little bit, but I'm just wondering how, in terms of the German people, and you will be speaking on behalf of the German people. Do they look on this as the Americans or Trump is taking the United States in that direction? How do you see the differential there?
Um, I I would say, first of all, so we can't be representative for the Germans because we're living in a bubble here. So from this bubble, I can tell you, I always try to make the difference that you just made and says, look, this is a government which possibly doesn't represent the objective of the people in this special regard, not putting the American people in a position where they kind of have done something dumb. It's something which it's a massive collateral damage. We know that the majority of the Americans is in favor of NATO, etc., etc. So this is something we always try to convey, and I think, and now I'm just judging, I'm just guessing, that people see Trump every day on TV. So this is the impression that you currently get from the US, and I think it's worth making an extra effort to make clear that there is a rest of America that is different than Donald Trump is and his entourage, which is now finally all in Washington and guides everything from Washington. And there's much more than Washington basically is. Still, yeah. There is much more than what comes out of Washington. But yes, it's an impression where that is currently made. I think it's repairable because what I have seen over the last decades, and I was always fascinated by it, is that so many people love to go to the US. Normal people love to go to the US and embrace this so different and so multifaceted country. And this is something which is I would say it's a cultural and social heritage that after this government, you can come back to it and healing will be possible.
I mean, I just joined a transatlantic think tank. I mean, just to underline the case that Christian just made, I think there is most decision makers and also the public make a difference between the government and what they think of America as such. In the same time, that puts the decision makers in a kind of tension between, we believe there are also other Americans, but we have to deal with the government that is in place in the moment. And responsible policymaking also means that we have to think in a long-term perspective. So I think there's a clear recognition that it's not all America, and there's this dream of America as we knew it, but I think the tension or the gap between what they have to deal with, the current government, and have to address, and what they believe or hope, or the rest of America, this is what the government has to deal with. So they can't just say we ignore the Trump government.
Right.
So there's a lot. I mean, Claude, you touched on this maybe in your first response, which there have been positive developments with this government removing the debt brake, pledging the 600 billion euros in defense over the next decade. So there is positive momentum there, as you both have said, a realization of the moment that we're in. But at the same time, I think these questions still loom about Germany and the rest of Europe's capacity and actual ability to translate the political pledges and promises into real results. And so can you talk about what are the factors that you think are going to most shape Germany and broader Europe's ability to follow through? When we're thinking about the necessity to ramp up on defense, will Germany be able to do it? And what stands in the way?
Maybe I start and Claudia then comes in. So I think, we did a paper right after the Munich Security Conference named "Managing the Divorce," the Transatlantic Divorce, and which was taken as a very conscious title, because a divorce doesn't mean the complete end, but somebody has walked out of the room and left the kitchen table. So you, whatever you want, you basically have to do it now on your own. I think that is tremendously helpful, and you can see that Europe starts organizing itself. The idea that there will be a kind of a replacement of the US as a hegemon is completely misleading. Europe will have to organize itself as a group of strong countries around which others basically can join. And I think we are in the middle of experiencing this. The French have reacted immediately, the Brits have reacted immediately. The Germans are not capable of doing that because of the government. We are just in bringing a new government, but nonetheless, whatever was possible was done already, also by Friedrich Merz. It will be a different setup for the political guidance and the ability to take decisions within Europe, because Europe is much bigger, especially if we talk about defense, than the European Union is. I guess the European Union will not play much of a role in this geostrategic decision making that needs to take place. We need to get the Brits on board, the Norwegians, the Turkish as well. There's a lot of things where we have to reorganize fundamentally, but this also can make us stronger with regard to what will come from Russia over the next 4 years, because there will be a massive non-military attack on whatever we do as a buildup. So I guess the disinformation campaigns are made already, ready, and we will see it from the beginning of the Merz government. Simply because, and this is the part of, so Germany will not lead the geostrategic dimension, but it will have the potential to lead and shape the industrial and the defense part of it. Simply because now we have financial resources that no other big country has. Others are in a completely situation with regard to their public debt. We have a leeway that nobody else currently can have, and this is a kind of a crystallization point, if you do it cleverly, around which Europe basically can build up and ramp up. That's not about, the European defense industrial base as a harmonious thing. I guess we'll see a lot of fragmentation. We have to live with it because the clock is against us. We have time maximum until 2029 to get ready to fight a war on our own. And that's basically the story around which we have to organize. But at least the Germans can help from the second row to enable this change in Germany. And last point on this, that links also back to what you said at the last point about the Americans. What I would say currently, there's weak signals of also the U.S. defense industry is not part of the government. And if you are a CEO sitting somewhere around Washington, in Arlington, or somewhere else, you have to wonder about where basically your revenues are going, because around 50 to 20% are still coming not from Germany but from Europe as such. Plus, your defense industrial base for the U.S. Armed Forces is partly in Europe. We are producing stuff you need. So I think we can see a kind of a shift or a new pillar in the transatlantic relationship that is much more to win-win economically, technically, and militarily. A need to cooperate, which cannot possibly be brought away from one or the other government on one or the other side of the Atlantic. I think this is quite encouraging, unless you really want to rip up the relationship, which will basically cause harm also to your armed forces.
Maybe just to add on what Christian said, I think one important point coming back to the finance element is Germany doesn't have any excuses anymore for not doing something because of the finance. Now, given that defense spending and total defense spending above 1% of the GDP is taken off the debt brake, there's literally, you can do not what you want because you still have the budget committee and the parliament to control you, but there's no more excuses. If you look at the European defense, how it has to reorganize itself, I think we have to do this in 5 areas. It's political leadership. This was Christian hinted at. The US cannot easily be replaced. It will not be Germany. It will be a group of countries. And if you look at the coalition compact, there's a clear messaging that Germany is willing to work in smaller formats, like in the E3, France, Germany, and the UK, or in the Weimar format, Germany, France, and Poland, in addition with the EU and NATO. So there is a recognition that we need those smaller leadership formats. So political leadership, but that also means you have to stand up for your ideas. So far, Jim, you know that in NATO, normally the US says something in the NAC and the rest says yes. So, and now, who are the Europeans who have to speak first and have to agree first and have to have an idea and an initiative? So it's leadership, it's the conventional area, it's mass that Europeans have to rebuild if the US is less invested. And we all struggle in Europe to build up the armed forces. We have the so-called Swedish model in the coalition compact, so a kind of voluntary model. It will not be enough. Then you have the critical enablers that the Europeans don't have enough or don't have at all. Deep precision strike, air and missile defense, all that, which they have to invest and which takes time. Then we have the whole nuclear question, how to assure nuclear deterrence with less US, how to assure that move on to a different model without a deterrence gap. Then you have the industrial dimension, force, that Christian mentioned already. And you have the whole resilience package. If the threat coming from Russia and other actors is not only military, but is in the whole gray zone between war and peace, what we already have in Europe actually, disinformation, drones flying over, sabotage, then we don't only need armed forces, we need total defense like the Finns and Swedes organize it perfectly. So in those 4 categories, leadership, conventional area, nuclear, industry, and resilience, Germany has to play a leading role because it's one of the biggest and most wealthy countries in Europe. And we can't hide away because, we don't have any money, we have it now. So you really have to live up to. And what is interesting, if you look at Europe in the moment, you have Merz, the new Chancellor, who goes out with a clear leadership ambition. And you have many European countries who want Germany to lead. So there could actually be a match between the ambition and the expectations. We have to hope that it really works because we all remember Scholz, the relationship with the European partners didn't work. With Macron, it didn't work. With the Poles, it didn't work. It worked halfway with Starmer, the UK Prime Minister. But the European dimension and the Zeitenwende as implemented by Scholz was so weak because he so much oriented himself towards Biden. So there is a huge European potential to be taken up by Merz, and many European countries are actually waiting for Merz to come in and to give it some European direction.
So one of the first tests of Germany and Europe's ability to step up may be coming sooner than any of us would have hoped for if the United States decides to walk away from the negotiations and its support for Ukraine. Can you talk a little bit about how, well, first of all, how Trump's new proposal is being responded to, reacted to in Germany? and what the debate, what the discussion, what the preparations look like in Berlin, if they do in fact need to step up and fill a gap that the United States might create, I think, eminently.
Yeah. So, I mean, the reaction, at least from the, let's say, from the commentators' side, that we currently see, is that I would say 99% say, okay, this sounds a little bit like written by the Kremlin, handed over to the White House, and somebody is just reading the bullet points. I'm not sure this is the way how this president also wants to be perceived by everybody. That he's basically the porte-parole, the press secretary of another country. Plus, everybody fears, of course, the lesson that Russia and others will take from the situation, from this. You basically get a bonus if you attack a country, take ground from him, and then the US will come around and say that was a great thing, and you get some extra. I think that this is the kind of that there's the general gist of the commentators currently here in Berlin. Politically, we are somewhere in between. So we have an outgoing government which technically still takes part in all the conversations, but doesn't, do much on communication. Also, I think because they see that what they have bet on, doesn't play out. So, I mean, what can Scholz basically bring to the history books if there is a so-called peace deal, which will never be a peace? I think this is kind of makes it very difficult for them. Behind the scenes, my impression is people are working really night and day on finding solutions, not to fill the gap because that's impossible, but to replace some of the key elements. And this is especially everything that deals with C4ISR. That the Americans, if they pull it out again, because they have done it before, will just turn the Ukrainians into a very difficult position, because they will not be able to react as fast as they can now on Russian movement on the ground, in air, on the missile threat, etc., etc. So it will be horrible. But we also see that others who are more kind of used to this already kind of also stepping up. So the French have sent in signal intelligence. So this is, I guess, it's a proof of the pudding, not only for Germany, but also for the ability of the alliance, of the European partners of the alliance, to step up and do what they can. Because the recognition, I guess, for most of the European countries and for the important countries is that if we are on our own, we can't quit the game, because we are on this chessboard anyway. So we can't take ourselves out of it.
Maybe just to add it, I agree with Christian said, and maybe just to show the dilemma or the tricky situation for the Europeans. If they accept a deal that they consider actually being based on Russian goals, that totally takes up Russian principles, will be disastrous for Ukraine, which might involve sending European troops to Ukraine, and Russia is very likely to test them. So on the one hand, accepting a deal that actually increases the risk for the next war in Europe, because Russia sees that it can get what it wants by waging war. So this is, on the one hand, accepting a deal that is actually unacceptable, or refusing that deal, then being blamed for continuing the war and not being able to offer an alternative. Because as Christian rightly said, Europeans can step up, they can do more, but they're not able to fill the holes if the Americans really stop it. So they are totally caught in dilemma. And on the other hand, for the Russians, it's a perfect situation. If they get the deal, they get what they wanted, and implemented and codified and justified by the US. And if Ukraine refuses this, they can blame Ukraine and the Europeans for continuing the war. And they can just carry on the war and hope that in the long term, a weakened Ukraine, a weakened Europe might just give up. And in a certain amount of time, they get Ukraine cheaper and easier than now. And the question that comes back to us Europeans, how could we arrive in such a situation? And on the one hand, it's the absence of strategy over the last 3 years. And on the other hand, it's the lack of investment in defense over the last, not 3 years, but decades. And because of the lack of investment, we are unable as Europeans to offer an alternative. We can say you should not accept it, but we can't do much more. And that was the impression yesterday in the public debates. It's like it's unacceptable. It's a Russian victory. But what is actually what is the option the Europeans have?
So one of the big factors in all of this, and it is included in Trump's proposal, which is, a quote unquote security guarantee for Ukraine, and in Trump's proposal, that's handed over to the Europeans to fulfill that role. It's clearly something that Russia has opposed, and so it's not eminently clear how that will play out moving forward. But if you presume that any of this is to move forward and that Ukraine at some point will need a security guarantee and that it's not coming from the United States, then how is Europe? I mean, you've touched on some of this, but how is Europe, how is Berlin thinking about this particular aspect of the conflict and of a potential resolution?
I mean, there are some words where I'm really not happy the way it is used. I mean, German newspapers talked about the peace proposal, and they said it's not a peace proposal. This is taking up Russian narratives. It's a proposal. It's not leading to peace. It might lead to a ceasefire. So, and the other is the talk about security guarantees in the German public domain, because security guarantees is something like you have nuclear weapons or you are NATO. This is an ally. An ally is defended. If you're not an ally, you are a partner, and you help partners, but you don't defend partners. And that's the big difference that Ukraine has been experiencing over the last 3 years. Ukraine was a partner and we were happy to help, but it's not an ally that you defend. So everything that is discussed in the moment, a potential coalition of the willing, European troops upholding a ceasefire, it's not a security guarantee. It's support, but it's not a guarantee. A guarantee would mean that those troops would accept to fight against Russia if Russia would attack Ukraine again. So I think we should be very honest what we are talking about. We're talking about potentially European troops that could help uphold a ceasefire in the second or third line behind a demilitarized zone, behind Ukrainian forces who would do the main work. So there have been talks since February in London, in Paris, about a potential coalition of the willing, because not NATO, as the US wanted it, not NATO, not EU because they can't do it, not UN because it wouldn't work, not OSCE, so coalition of the willing. The shots, so the chief of the defense staff of the UK and France went to Ukraine to talk with the Ukrainians what could be done. But in the end, it remains very unclear what this kind of coalition would do. Would it be a reassurance force? Would it be a deterrence force? If we would be very honest with that force, it would mean moving the border where Russia is deterred from the NATO border into Ukraine. That's a big step. And in order to be credible, this force needs a certain amount of troops that Europeans don't have, something between 40,000 or 150,000, but Europeans don't have, with certain enablers that Europeans don't have, like air and missile defense, cyber, transport, but the US brings in. And particularly, it needs to be credible. Now, Europeans are unwilling to really step up the military support for Ukraine, like additional air and missile defense. But we talk about credibly sending troops to Ukraine. Is it easier to send troops to Ukraine than to give them another Patriot system? So, I mean, the best security guarantee that Ukraine could get is NATO membership, as promised in the Washington summit and in the Vilnius summit. But they don't get it. And now we send a coalition of the willing that promises to defend Ukraine. I mean, there's so much dilemmata in it. And you could break it even more down, and you can say that most European countries put their entire armed forces into NATO defense planning. France is different, UK is different, but most countries put their troops into NATO defense planning. If you want to put troops in Ukraine, they have to be taken out of that defense planning. And that would mean that we accept to weaken NATO's defense planning in order to support a non-NATO ally. So would we put, for example, the Baltic region at risk because we take troops out of their equipment in order to support Ukraine? I personally think we should think about it, because a safe, secure, sovereign Ukraine is a central element for our own stability and security and peace in Europe. But you have to think about how to assure credibility if you don't accept Ukraine in NATO, but we will defend it, where you get the troops from, how sustainable is it, how long is it going to be, where are they going to station, how are you going to credibly say that they will actually engage in defending Ukraine, deterring Russia, reassuring Ukraine? I mean, you can always say we can't just take the lengths of the border, 2,000 kilometers between Russia and Ukraine, more than 1,000 between Belarus and Ukraine. They will not be at the border. They will be behind, because you might have a demilitarized zone, you might have Ukrainian forces first. But this is still an enormous task that this coalition has to do. And Russia might be tempted to test it very soon.
Those are exactly my thoughts as well. Throughout this whole period of talking about a coalition and reassurance and all of that, you very well have laid out the problems, and even with clarification, I'm not sure we're going to like what we see, because, as you say, there's just not the capabilities there in various areas to really make this a deterrent force, something that will be respected by Russia instead of tested by Russia. Christian, you want to add anything to this as well?
I mean, it's just one sentence, right? There is no security guarantee. There is not even a plan that would deliver to all the criteria or to some of the criteria that Claudia has made. So basically, you give Ukraine a piece of paper signed by people who are not trustworthy, and say, so this is the best that you can get.
It's the Budapest memorandum.
Yeah, exactly. It's something like this coming back, and I think so. We're moving from Budapest back to Minsk 1, 2, and now we have Minsk 3. And I think the alternative is then, okay, so if you can't get the security guarantee for Ukraine, what is about a higher level of insecurity for Russia? So you have to increase, not only by military means, the insecurity of Russia. And in this respect, I think this is the only way that we can do. And there we are in the area of sanctions, where I think that's the full spectrum that we have to go. The US, also Trump, wants to bring sanctions possibly down, which will help the Russians to ramp up the industrial base again, and basically accelerate the threat build up to the rest of Europe. So a lot of things we can't accept. And last sentence, I think it's time, and I hope this is happening already, to really integrate Ukraine in the European defense planning. And that's, of course, something that's difficult to do it formally in NATO. But as you have all the people around who can do it, I guess it's something where you have to think about a NATO -1 setup of a command and control unit which can do the strategic planning and the operative planning for this. And this is, I think, this is the way we have to go, as a part of managing the divorce, and looking into a very risky future but we still have to try and mitigate the risk as much as we can.
Yeah.
Maybe just two little comments, because I found it fascinating that nobody of this group of this podcast mentioned the G7 security arrangements, because they are only arrangements, but they have been labeled at a certain point as security guarantees, but they're not.
Right.
So we don't even talk about it anymore, but we should at least mention them. And Christian, you talked about divorce planning. I think I would still prefer the word, maybe it's just wording, but I would still prefer the transition plan we also mentioned in in a publication to make it maybe a bit more cooperative, to say we recognize US that you have your priorities elsewhere and that you are less interested. We realize that we have to step up. Is there a way of coordinating this process and transition towards a stronger European defense with a US opt-in? Is there a way of doing this in a coordinated way, or will it be tremendously disruptive? Which I fear, but we should still try to plan a certain transition, not to kick the US out. It's not about that, but to enabling to say, okay, we realize you have other priorities. How can we relieve you of the European tasks and take up more of our own responsibility?
Yeah, but I
Well,
think that's
I think that's right. Christian, you wanted to say something?
yeah. I agree what you say, kind of as part of the kind of how you frame it diplomatically. At the same time, this is the question where we don't get an answer to what is the character of the current administration. Is it just has a different plan that sounds very rational, or is it really antagonistic, not only chaotic but also antagonistic? And in this condition, can we make a deal, coming back to what I said before? So there is a so because I mean, you will have to give in something here. What the Europeans can bring to the table in a new transatlantic bargain, where the US says, okay, now we are interested in possibly making a deal that says the US will not be engaged in a kinetic way, but it provides the enablers, especially in the information sphere and in the cybersphere, so that no American soldier can die. But we recognize that we are even not interested in European security, but we are interested in what the Europeans can do for American security and the American defense industrial base. Maybe that's the only thing that you can bring in, because otherwise you're just begging for something, and you put yourself in a dependence of somebody who is really, is enigmatic in the best way how you can. That's the nicest way of putting it.
Yeah, no, you're right. And that's part of our problem for all of us in the US as well. We don't see where this is going in terms of the administration. And, we're all waiting for the posture review to be over so we can see if there's going to be a part of the posture review that has US forces leaving Europe, and more than just 10,000, but a large number, and maybe turning SACEUR over to Europe as well. So those are all body blows to how we've grown used to working with one another at NATO, and just adds to the frustration of planning for Europe in terms of the transition. So what's the end game here? What are we transitioning to? What does this look like? And there's that nuclear dimension too. And we're coming towards the close of the podcast, and I would love to raise the nuclear side, and just ask this, I guess. It's interesting. I teach here at Sciences Po, and midterm papers, I got two of them from the class, both talking about the extended nuclear umbrella. How would it work with France extending it over Germany, et cetera, et cetera. So it's gone from something that was being kicked around by a handful of think tankers a few years ago, to all of a sudden it's now in the graduate school, and people are actually talking about it. And so what's the state of play? Is this in Germany? Is this still something that's kind of what you get at think tanks, and it's not really something seriously discussed? Or suddenly has this become something you can raise in polite society without being laughed at?
We have regularly in Germany debates about the Euro deterrent, the Euro bomb, or things like that. Normally it comes in the summer. We have in Germany this phenomenon of the summer break, where the media don't get much news, and then you normally have an article about the Euro bomb.
Right.
And I found it very worrying when over the last Christmas breaks, we already had an article about the Eurobomb, which means the topic is getting getting greater importance. So it's indeed debated in Germany, but in a very shy way, because traditionally Germany didn't really wanted to engage in the debate with France because it feared that any debate with France about the French deterrence would be perceived as questioning the US role in NATO. And Germany's perspective on deterrence is NATO and US. So I remember when President Macron gave his famous speech at the École de Guerre in February 2020, where he mentioned again, like in previous documents already, that the French deterrent has a European dimension, and he invited
Right.
for a dialogue on the role of the French deterrent in Europe. That the German reaction was first like, we didn't hear anything, and then very shy and almost reluctant, because the German government then thought, if we engage, US and all the others might think we are not longer interested in NATO.
Yeah.
And this has changed. In the same time, to be very honest, if I look at it from an analytical point of view, the US has questioned literally everything in NATO, but not the nuclear dimension.
Right.
Of course, you can't disconnect, you know that better than me, the nuclear from the conventional. You need a conventional footprint to make the nuclear credible. But in the same time, the first Trump administration and now has kept the nuclear out of the debate. So this is at least something we should see. From a US perspective, the nuclear is a very handy instrument to coerce the Europeans, to put pressure on the Europeans, to say, if you don't do this, we might think about it again. But all the debates, so I'm curious to see whether the US will also question the nuclear dimension. You could obviously say, if the political trust is not longer there, if the conventional footprint is not longer there, nuclear deterrence doesn't work anymore. So I'm all with you. But at least to say for the record, it hasn't been questioned in the same way like the political and the conventional dimension.
Yeah.
If you look at the European debate, we have an increased debate about what France can do and what the UK can do. But I think we should be very clear that they can't make the same offer that the US is giving to NATO. Now we have an extended deterrence, an intercontinental transatlantic deterrence. What France and the UK might offer would be only a regional deterrence in Europe.
Right.
Both nuclear arsenals, France and the UK, have been conceived to function under the US umbrella. They have not been conceived as functioning on their own for Europe. And they both, in the moment, are there to protect national vital interest. So they have to change their doctrine. In the French doctrine, extended deterrence is not foreseen because they don't believe in it. They don't think it actually works. The amount of warheads they have, about 300, is not made to protect Europe. So the doctrine is not there, the capabilities are not there. And if you look at the UK, they depend for the development on the US. They can operate it on their own, but for the development, they depend on the US. So the only really independent nuclear force, the weapon up to the delivery system, is France. So the change is on the nuclear states with regard to doctrine, with regard to capabilities, with regard to delivery systems. We have already a debate for the UK whether they should reconsider an air leg. But there's also a change for the conventional states. I mean, also Germany, the nuclear sharing states, and the others like Poland, they have to think about their role. So all what I want to say is it's not easy. It will not be the same protection, and it will mean instability and insecurity, not only for Europeans, but also for Russia and the other states.
Right.
So it's by no way something, if I could choose, I would opt. The question is whether we might be forced to consider it. We have dialogues ongoing, France and Germany, France and Poland, France and Finland, France and Sweden. So there's lots of talking in the moment, but as you know, it's not a topic we like to discuss in public.
Yeah. No, that's and believe it or not, the papers I got from my students said about the same thing. So that's good. Christian, you want to add to that?
Maybe just only 2 points, I guess. I mean, the dilemma for the US is if you say the nuclear guarantee is still around, but you withdraw conventional firepower, then you get closer to the nuclear threshold. So this is kind of, this mind-blowing dimension of which you also can see the same mindset also in my country, where I think we're still in a very infant state of the idea, you just only need to have a nuclear bomb and you put it on your shelf, and then it's okay. And not understanding that, nuclear dimension is about managing escalation and de-escalation and all these things, and you have to be able to take extremely bold decisions on this. And this is something which has never been in the job description of any German chancellor. And even if you say, "Look, I'm happy to think about it," I guess you will feel, once you really are confronted with all the different decisions that you would have to take, that you're really entering into one of the center stages of hell, basically. And we have never been used to that. We have outsourced the thinking about it, and the conversation in Germany is exactly reflecting that. Once you have a bomb, you're safe, without having any idea of demonstrating that you have a certain idea of how to use it, and when not to use it.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. And that's for a whole nother podcast. But I have a feeling at some point we'll have to have a podcast just on this, because we need to educate a lot of people about what this means. And not yet, and not right now, but I think it's coming, and we're going to have to step up as podcasters, and we'll have you guys back, and we'll dig more deeply into it. But anyway, thank you so much. We're going to have to call it here. And this is what a different place we're in compared to a couple of years ago, when we were talking about defense spending and this type of thing. What a different place we are at. But I'm really so glad that we're shoulder to shoulder in this, you guys and us. And look forward to working with you all again as we try to figure our way out of the bramble and into the sunlight. So thank you all, and I wish you all the very best weekend as it comes upon us.
Thanks for having us. It was really terrific. Fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you both very much. See you soon again.